Hi and welcome to Mondraker TV. In today's video, I'm going to be telling you all about our latest collaboration. And this is the coolest one yet. As you can probably tell, we are doing a collaboration with Golf, one of the most iconic brands in motorsport, which means I've got a very cool and very special bike to show you. But first, let's take in some of this. This is the Rothgo collection, the largest privately owned collection of golf racing motor vehicles, I think pretty much anywhere on the planet. Now, golf to me is what screams out. If you say something like Le Mans 24 hours, just the colours alone, the powder blue, that orange, and the pinstriping, they're just etched into my memory. In fact, if you were to take away any of the graphics on any of these vehicles here, you would instantly know the relationship with golf. It's a perfect example of branding. Although it's not related, Mondraker bikes also share a very individual thing. If you're to look at the silhouette of any of our bikes, like the Neat for example, the top tube is like a blade. We have that pocket behind the head tube. Even the shape of the suspension configuration on our bikes is easily identifiable as us. But let's move on and have a look at some of these incredible vehicles. The collection in this room is actually quite hard to take in. Over the back, you've got Aston Martins, you've even got an early Michael Schumacher Formula One car here. But you've got things like the Mirage, the GT40. In fact, that Mirage M1 here, just behind me, that was based on the GT40 platform. And then you've got all these incredible cars that were raced by some icons in the sport. And some of these names are ones that I grew up seeing on TV and remember my dad talking about from the days of racing. So you've got Derek Bell on here, you've got Mike Hayward, Jackie X, another Derek Bell car here. And then of course, moving down, you've got the Can-Am cars. These ones are the McLarens. And in fact, this first one was actually raced by Bruce McLaren. I've got to get a bit closer and have a look at this one because this is wild. Bears the name on the side and look at the size of the fin on the back of this. This one actually had the fin mounted directly to the suspension on there, so it didn't have too much pressure from the body on there, so it could run softer suspension. And you know, like, this really is like a love letter to car racing. It's just a formidable room of cars. There's not really more I can say about it. But you know, we too also love racing at Mondraker. It's what our company was founded on. Our founder himself was actually a downhill racer, and the very first bike we produced was a downhill race bike. It's really in our blood. But it's not just about mountain bike racing. Motorsport has always been a huge part of everything behind Mondraker bikes. We're talking about motocross, MotoGP, the Dakar Rally, Formula One, and of course, endurance car racing like the Le Mans 24 hour. And that's why I'm so excited about this collaboration, because sat right down the back there is a car very special to me, and I think probably the most iconic to ever wear the Golf livery. The Porsche 917K. Look at this thing. Oh, like, this thing is just incredible. I've seen this in more photos than I can imagine over the years, and video clips of course, and even in Hollywood films. I mean, Steve McQueen famously drove one of these, marked up as a number 20 in that Le Mans film. But nothing prepares you for seeing this in the flesh. The Golf livery, how low and sculpted it is, it's just breathtaking. It really, really is. I can feel your eyes beaming into me a bit though. You're probably wondering where the Mondraker bike is, huh? Well, you're gonna have to let me indulge for a minute because I can't not. This thing has got some seriously cool tech around it. So these were originally built around a 4.5 litre engine. This one's a 5 litre, 600 brake that would do 0 to 60 in 2.7 seconds. Now the engine on this is a 180-degree mounted V12. It was often referred to as a flat 12. But all of this stuff aside, even the story of how these came to be is crazy. So take yourself back to the late 60s, and in racing you had a prototype class and you had the sports car class. Now in prototype class we tended to see cars that resembled things like this. Some of the cars were just getting so fast and arguably so dangerous that the governing body decided to put some regulations in place for the safety of the sport. Now that meant taking the engine size down to 3 litres, okay? But there was a way you could use a 5-litre engine, and that meant entering your car into the sports car class. But there were a number of things that you needed to do in order for the car to qualify. Now the first one was it had to have a spare wheel. So Porsche, being Porsche, designed the first little space saver wheel with their tyre sponsor, and that was stored above the exhaust on the back. On the inside, you had to have a passenger seat, you had to have a traditional turnkey style ignition where you literally put the key in and start the vehicle. You had to have turn signals or indicators on the rear of the car, and you also had to have a luggage compartment because you're clearly going to do a weekender with a vehicle like this. Now, if that wasn't already enough and difficult enough to adhere to, you also had to build 25 of the things. Now think of the cost and the difficulty in doing that. That was enough to put off car designers and car brands, but not Porsche. Porsche were desperate to win Le Mans, so they got to work. And here's the other thing that's crazy. They designed these and they built 25 of them in just 10 months. And there is some serious tech involved in this thing. So the engine sits just behind me here. And as I've already said, on here there's a big 5-litre, 180-degree V12 engine mounted in there. It's super low in the chassis, and as you can see, that enables them to build the vehicle to be like bullet-shaped, to just cut through the air and be ridiculously aerodynamic. But what's underneath this really does interest me from a bike perspective, the frame that actually holds this thing together. Now, unlike Ferrari with the 512 that used a steel space frame, Porsche with the 917 actually used an alloy space frame. Now this thing weighed just 42 kilograms. To put that into perspective, the steel one used in the Ferrari 512 was about 100 kilograms heavier. 100 kilograms heavier. This thing is crazy light. We're talking about 800 kilograms all in with the engine ready to race. Now, something else very cool about that alloy space frame is on the very early models, in a very efficient maneuver from Porsche, they did away with having a separate oil tank and actually had parts of that space frame filled with the oil. But apparently some of the drivers complained that they were heating up a bit too much on the inside. I guess it would have been like driving a giant radiator as such. So they later moved away from that. However, the coolest thing about the space frame on here, from my perspective, thinking about bike design and stuff, is how they would detect cracks in it. So they actually pressurized it with nitrogen. There's literally a Schrader valve around the back, and you had a pressure gauge on the dashboard. And basically, if you had a loss of pressure, it pretty much meant there was a crack in there, so that nitrogen was escaping somewhere. If you're looking at the dashboard and you're driving and you've got good pressure, no problem. Keep that foot buried. This thing was just so tech for the time. And it was also extremely fast. So the earliest models were so aerodynamic, but they actually lacked downforce on them. But that also enabled them to do, I think it was 246 miles an hour they managed to achieve on the Mulsanne Straight, which was about 30 miles an hour quicker than what Ferrari could achieve at the time, which is just staggering. I think 246 miles an hour in like 1970. That's just crazy fast. So this particular 917K is number 26 of the 50 that were made. They obviously made 25 to start with to qualify to be in that class, and then later made more because it was such a popular car. Now this particular one was the most successful one to wear the Golf livery and actually got second place at Le Mans. Now unfortunately though, with these cars, they had such an impact in the era they were out. They were the fastest cars out there, and they were just category defining. It's just such a formidable beast. But the very loophole that enabled them to be created in the first place was actually closed down by the governing body in favour of bringing in that 3-litre engine size again. So the reign of the mighty 5-litre actually came to an end. But this is just one vehicle that wore the Golf livery. Every single vehicle here and every single vehicle that ever wore the Golf livery was the absolute top of its game, the absolute pinnacle of technological advancement. That says a lot about Golf, and actually I think there's a lot of synergy between that brand and what we do at Mondraker. The drive of racing has definitely fueled the progression in our bike design, And that's one of the things that drew Golf to want to collaborate with us. And this is the bike they chose. This is our category-defining lightweight EMTB, and it uses the TQ HPR50 motor system on here. The Stealth Air carbon frame design has taken everything that Mondraker has learnt from decades of working with downhill racers and the downhill race bikes, and it's applied it to a frame that's both incredibly robust and exceptionally beautiful. And I think you'll agree with me here, in the Golf livery, it just looks wild. So let's talk a bit about the frame, which is made from our Stealth Air carbon. This uses the latest iteration of our forward geometry on here, and is running a 64.5 degree head angle on the front, a 76.5 degree seat angle on here, 450mm chainstays, and the reach across the four sizes available is 450mm on the small, 470mm on the medium, 495 on the large, and 515 on the extra large. This geometry has been based on everything that we have learned from racing and applied it again to a bike that's just an absolute beast no matter what you're going to be riding on here. This also has the latest version of our Zero suspension platform, which has always driven the shock from both the top and the bottom. But in order to accomplish this bike, and one of the needs for this, which was having a range extender, we wanted to create space in the front triangle for both the water bottle and the range extender. To do this, we've had to lower the top rocker down and revise the position of the shock. It's still driven from both ends, but it has a lower mounting position on the bike. This in turn also gives you a better center of gravity here. And it's all about the distribution of your weight on a bike like this, much like it is on race cars. The lower the weight, the better center of gravity you've got, the more traction and weight you can apply onto those wheels. And the geometry on the bike, of course, enables us to both weight the front and rear independently, but also together. One of the things of having a long front center on a bike is climbing. It's not just about having the confidence for descending. So the bike really is about balance. Now, the motor system on here is the secret weapon of the Mondraker Neat. Now this is the TQ HPR50 system. It's an absolutely tiny motor. And unlike those that use the bigger full powered motors that have reducing gears on the inside, this uses a harmonic pin drive system. So there's almost zero friction in there. In fact, the only friction you have to overcome if you're going to power this without the battery on or over the assistance of the motor is from the waterproof seals. So you're talking about 2 watts here. So it really is a very natural feeling motor. This is further accentuated by the narrow Q factor. So the position of your pedals on this bike feels just like your regular mountain bike. Combine that with a motor system that puts out 50 Newton meters of torque with 300 watts of peak power. And you've got the recipe for a bike that feels lively, agile, responsive, but also enables you to climb things that you didn't before think was possible. As with all of our bikes, all the components are hand chosen on here to be the absolute best possible choice for what the bike is intended for. And the fact that this bike runs 150mm of travel on the rear and 160 on the front tells you this bike can handle anything you see fit. The paintwork on this Mondraker Neat is an official collaboration with Golf and Mondraker bikes. Now there's only going to be 50 of these available. These were painted at our unique paint shop just outside Elche in Spain. This particular one is number 1 of 50, and these are so limited that I've been told I'm not even allowed to ride any of them. These are just going to be for collectors and buyers. But you know what, I'm kind of all right with that because of the fact I've got to be here at the Roth Go Golf Heritage Collection checking out just an incredible array of cars, including the 917K, which it still makes me feel funny stood next to this thing. This is a truly iconic car from the 1970s that I think defines an era of racing, and is probably the most iconic car to ever wear that branding and have that alongside one of our most incredible looking bikes that takes everything that we've learnt with our racing heritage. So I think there's some great parallels in there. And you know, even a little thing for me that really does it is that number 20 on the top tube there. That just nods to Steve McQueen and the number 20 that he drove in that Le Mans classic film, of course, with that 917K. And from the Rothko Heritage Golf Collection to here, one of the places where that 917K has actually driven around in the same livery as we have here on our Mondraker Neat. Now, what a place, standing here on the corkscrew, one of the most iconic things on any racetrack. And man, this thing is steep and we're pretty lucky just to be stood here at the moment. How cool is that? These things are just beautiful and you don't need to hear anything else from me, but I'd love to know what you think of this collaboration, and also what do you think of that Porsche 917K? That is one of the wildest things I've ever had the privilege of seeing. I'm going to get off screen now, but thank you for watching. Don't forget to check out mondraker.com to find out everything else about our cool collaboration, and we'll see you in another video soon. Give us some love in those comments. Ta-ra.